If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that every once in a while I like to put out a video that completely destroys my subscriber count or ruins my like to dislike ratio. So in keeping with that spirit, let's take a few minutes to talk about guns. I've learned that it's become strangely important to give your credentials before anyone takes you seriously regarding this issue. It's a lot like gaming. This is the new having your rig specs down in your forum signature. So firstly, I am a political moderate. Look, even Facebook, which knows all of my secrets, labeled me as one. As a result, I've been called both a libtard and a Nazi. Sometimes in the same video. Being in the middle is a lot of fun, trust me. So my goal with this video is not to sway you one direction or another. What I hope to accomplish is to serve as somewhat of a bridge between the two sides. I want you to understand where we were, where we are, and where some people want us to go, and at least be able to use the same vocabulary moving forward. So I am going to talk about some of the proposals for gun control in the future, and I know that just addressing them instead of dismissing them right out of hand must mean that I want to destroy America or something. I don't. In fact, the eagle-eyed among you probably noticed that Facebook also seems to know that I am a veteran. Here I am holding an M60. This is definitely my favorite picture. I look like a total bamf. I was in the Army for 7 years. Yes, 7. I was stop-loss during my deployment. Thanks, Obama. My first MOS was as a field artillery cannon crew member, which also means that I'm a crew-served weapons specialist. I've fired everything from the 155mm howitzer, to the 9mm pistol, to the Mark 19 automatic grenade launcher. Yes, that is a real thing, and yes, it's just as ridiculous as you imagine. Later I changed over to the Signal Corps, but then I was deployed. I was in Iraq from 2009 to 2010 as a convoy security gunner, running back and forth between Nasiriyah, Iraq and the Kuwaiti border, where this picture was taken. Yes, I'm well aware of the fact that that's not an M60, it's a 240 Bravo. So if you see any comments down below about how that's not an M60 and I have no idea what I'm talking about, it means they barely made it past the first minute.
It's a trap!
So where does your right to own a gun come from?
And the policies that you're proposing, which by the way strip other people of their fundamental human rights.
Fundamental human right?
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
A fundamental human right is something that explicitly isn't written, like the right to privacy or the right to have a name. If it's written down as part of a law somewhere, it's not a fundamental human right. Now, I know what he's stretching that to mean, the right to self-defense and self-preservation. And he is kind of right when it comes to that, but there is no guarantee of what tools can be used. That part has to be written. Even the right to not be owned by another person had to be written down. That's how vague and abstract fundamental human rights are. But in the gun debate, many people will assert that it's a God-given right. Now, I've read this book once or twice, and I've even skimmed through other translations of the same book. Guns and firearms are never mentioned. I am allowed to own people in these though, so that's interesting. I've even read the sequel, which was written well after guns were invented, and they're not in here either, so maybe I'm missing something. God is never mentioned in the Constitution either. Your creator is in the Declaration of Independence, but that's not law. It was written over a decade before the Constitution. And you're only endowed by your creator with 3 inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's interesting about that last one is that in the original draft, it was the pursuit of property, so it's a little strange that God-given rights are up to human revision. But that's not the point. I'm not trying to bash religion or anything. Your right to own a gun comes from the government, not some supreme being or some inherent humanness, but the Constitution, specifically the Second Amendment.
A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Now here's where I'm going to start losing some people. As if I didn't already. The Second Amendment is not some in case of tyranny break glass clause in the Constitution. That whole in the course of human events it becomes necessary to dissolve blah blah comes from the Declaration of Independence, which again is not law. It's not for the security of the people from a free state, it's for the security of a free state. But from who? From foreign invaders, Native Americans, and yes, even the federal government. When the Constitution was adopted in 1789, the United States didn't at all look like the United States of today. And I don't just mean geographically. It was more like the European Union, a collection of states loosely banded together mostly for economic benefit. People didn't really identify as American yet. They were Virginian or Pennsylvanian. The standing federal US Army was very small, so the majority of military power came from state militias. And the Second Amendment guaranteed the right of the states to form those state militias. It was not an individual right to own guns. None of the Founding Fathers, whether it be during the Constitutional Convention or in the Federalist Papers, ever talked about individual gun ownership. It was always in reference to state militias, which, by the way, aren't really a thing anymore. They do exist in, like, Texas, because of course they do in Texas, but they aren't the National Guard. I was in the National Guard. You swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state, which would kind of put you at odds during a civil war.
So many vows. They make you swear and swear.
Speaking of the Civil War, while there were federally organized US troops, most of the forces were state units or militias, like the 54th Massachusetts. It wasn't until after the Civil War that people really started to identify themselves as American, which brings us to the first Supreme Court case that I want to talk about. Presser v. Illinois. Presser was part of a local workers' militia not assembled by any government, and the state weirdly didn't allow that. The court's decision was that the Second Amendment did not apply to the individual except as part of a government militia for the good of the United States. So basically, they kind of rewrote the amendment from this to this, which wasn't that much of a change. We were now a united country after all. It's important to note that at this point, the only practical firearms that existed were muzzle-loaded rifles, pistols, and shotguns. Lever action and repeating rifles were still fairly new, and the only machine gun in existence still needed to be carted around by a horse. The Founding Fathers were smart, but they couldn't see into the future. They didn't even know what was on the other side of the Mississippi, which is why several ways to change the Constitution were built into it, like amendments. But more often, Supreme Court cases change the interpretation rather than the actual language, as we've just seen. So as new weapons came out, the government had to figure out how to handle them. In 1934, the first real gun control law was passed, the National Firearms Act. This law mandated a special tax stamp and registry of all sorts of weapons, like machine guns, short-barreled rifles and shotguns, anything larger than a .50 caliber, explosives, and even poison gas. Things I hope we can all agree shouldn't be in the hands of civilians. But this is what also allows people on the Discovery Channel to get their hands on them. It's not impossible, it's just very difficult. 5 years after the law, we have our next Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Miller. Miller was in possession of a sawed-off shotgun and argued that the Second Amendment allowed him to do so. The Supreme Court disagreed, saying that it had no military utility. In fact, its only real purpose was to hide under your coat so that you could shoot people. They decided that the Second Amendment only applies to ordinary military equipment that could be used as part of a well-regulated militia. So basically only pistols, rifles, and long-barreled shotguns, reaffirming the constitutionality of the NFA. Then basically, nothing happened until the Gun Control Act of 1968, which mostly regulated interstate commerce when it comes to guns. If you want to sell or transfer firearms across state lines, you have to have a federal firearms license, or FFL. This basically means any store, since you likely get the majority of your stock from other states. Individuals can sell to other individuals without a license as long as it's within their own state. Do you see a problem with this yet? We're gonna jump ahead to 1993 when the Brady Bill was passed, which created a whole new list of criteria that would disqualify someone from owning a gun. This is the list which is currently enforced, which prohibits felons, fugitives, illegal aliens, and dishonorably discharged veterans from owning guns. How can the government possibly enforce these rules? By requiring every federally licensed gun retailer to run a background check on potential buyers. So if I want to buy a gun from a store, they have an FFL, so there's a background check. But if I want to buy a gun from a private individual, say at a gun show, no license, no background check. This is the gun show loophole, the thing that many people think should be closed, including this guy actually.
I believe in background checks at gun shows or anywhere to make sure that guns don't get in the hands of people that shouldn't have them.
In 1986, Ronald Reagan passed the Firearm Owners Protection Act, also known as the machine gun ban. A few years later, in 1989, someone walked onto an elementary school playground in Stockton, California with a legally purchased AK-47 and killed several children and injured several dozen others. In response to this, only 3 weeks later, Ronald Reagan said,
"And I do not believe in taking away the right of the citizen to own guns for sporting, for hunting and so forth, or for home defense. But I do believe that an AK-47, a machine gun, is not a sporting weapon."
Here's the problem though. That shooting wasn't perpetrated with a machine gun. Reagan seems to have fallen victim to the same thing gun rights advocates chastise the left for. a lack of understanding of the vocabulary. So let's fix that now. The 1986 machine gun ban eliminated the sale and manufacture of new machine guns. If you own one prior to 1986, you could keep it. You could even sell it to someone else under the National Firearms Act. It requires months of paperwork and costs a fortune though. A pre-ban machine gun can cost you $20,000 or more. So I suppose the question of the hour is, what is a machine gun? Any weapon that when you pull and hold the trigger fires more than one bullet, also known as an automatic rifle, or more popularly an assault rifle. Yes, assault rifles are already banned, but the AK-47 used in that shooting was a semi-automatic. Pull the trigger, one bullet. Pull the trigger, one bullet. So in 1994, Reagan, along with former presidents Ford and Carter, wrote a joint letter to Congress saying,
"We are writing to urge your support for a ban on the domestic manufacture of military-style assault weapons. Every major law enforcement organization in America and dozens of leading labor, medical, religious, civil rights, and civic groups support such a ban. Most importantly, poll after poll shows that the American public overwhelmingly supports a ban on assault weapons. We urge you to listen to the American public and to the law enforcement community and support a ban on the further manufacture of these weapons."
Congress and President Clinton listened, which led to the assault weapons ban in 1994. So what is an assault weapon? To answer that, we need to look at the AR-15. Just to get a few things out of the way, the official name of the original patent-holding name brand was the Colt Armalite AR-15. The AR stands for Armalite rifle, so rather redundantly, the entire name of the original rifle is the Colt Armalite Rifle 15. The patent expired, so now everyone has their own versions of the AR-15, but they're all basically the same, so I'm going to refer to all of them collectively as the AR-15. Is the AR-15 an assault rifle? No, it was prior to 1986, but since then they've all been semi-automatic. Is the AR-15 an assault weapon? That's when things get a little tricky. An assault weapon is a semi-automatic rifle with two or more of the following. A pistol grip. Yes, all AR-15s have that. So as long as it didn't have any more, it was completely legal. A folding or telescoping stock, a grenade launcher, well, nobody can own grenades anyway, so a bayonet mount? Why would... Okay, next. A flash suppressor, or a barrel capable of supporting one, which is not a silencer, it's this bit, which is a pretty important piece for not blinding the shooter and, depending on the design, reduces recoil. So the AR-15 was legal during the assault weapons ban as long as it was modified to not have certain features. So a fully automatic machine gun is an assault rifle, a semi-automatic rifle with a pistol grip and a flash suppressor is an assault weapon, but get rid of just one of those and it's not. It's a modern sporting rifle. But all of these fall under the umbrella term assault style rifles. So when stores like Dick's Sporting Goods decided they would no longer sell these, everyone knew what they meant. The ban also prohibited the transfer or possession of large capacity ammunition feeding devices, which is anything that holds more than 10 rounds. Pay attention because this is something that gamers do that annoys anyone who knows anything about guns. This is a clip, this is a magazine, this is a high capacity magazine, this is a drum, and this is a juice box. Hey, I gotta future-proof these videos somehow. High-capacity magazines and drums were illegal until the assault weapons ban was lifted in 2004.
I made my intentions, my views clear. I did think we ought to extend the assault weapons ban, and was told the fact that the bill was never going to move.
Although it wasn't actually lifted, it had an expiration date built in, which is something I've never really liked. It's a way for Congress to blame the current administration for raising taxes or making something legal, when really it was Congress 10 years ago that did that, but that's beside the point. The AR-15 wasn't really popular until after the assault weapons ban was lifted, because now they could have all the fun cosmetic attachments they wanted, as long as it wasn't full auto. Again, being fully automatic means that when you pull and hold the trigger, it continuously fires multiple bullets until you let go of the trigger. That was a bump stock, which makes the trigger move back and forth so your stationary finger is pulling it every time, making it technically not automatic and therefore technically legal. But your firing rate is like 90% that of full auto, so Close enough. After the Vegas shooting, many people mistakenly thought that the shooter had illegally modified his weapons to be fully automatic. He didn't. He used a bump stock. How difficult is it to modify your weapons to be full auto anyway? Turns out, not that difficult. There are a number of videos on YouTube showing you how to do it. But you don't really have to, because there are a number of legal increased rate of fire devices on the market like bump stocks that get you close enough. As of the recording of this video, bump stocks are still legal but are in the process of becoming illegal. Unlike the grandfather clause of the machine gun ban, if they are made illegal, you would have to surrender or destroy any existing bump stocks. So there we go, all of the vocabulary should be cleared up. I hope. In 2008, the Supreme Court heard DC v. Heller, the first Second Amendment case since before World War II. I won't get into the particulars of this case since Mr. Beat already did that. But in short, Heller sued the city for the ability to keep a gun in his home, which was illegal at the time. The Supreme Court agreed with Heller, and for the first time ever, affirmed the individual right to keep and bear arms regardless of military service. They effectively changed the interpretation of the Second Amendment from this to just this by saying that anyone can technically be part of the militia, which is also why a certain influential gun lobby only has that part posted in their headquarters lobby. In 2016, they heard Caetano v. Massachusetts, which extended the Second Amendment to all weapons regardless of military utility, unless otherwise made illegal. So stun guns okay, machine guns and rocket launchers not okay. So that's where we are now. It doesn't really matter what the original intent of the Founding Fathers was. What matters is how it's interpreted today. There was no guaranteed individual right to own guns under the Founding Fathers. There is today. There were no machine guns or even semi-automatics when the Founding Fathers were around. There are today. As I've tried to make abundantly clear, the framers of the Constitution were intelligent and forward-thinking, but the United States was a completely different place 230 years ago. That was a time when you were basically born, lived, and died in the same town. They didn't even have railroads yet, so they couldn't even imagine sitting in a metal tube and essentially teleporting from one side of the country to the other and back again all within the same day. State laws were far more important and effective back then. They aren't so much today. So using California's state gun control as an example of why gun control doesn't work is ridiculous. State borders look like this, not like this. And don't even talk to me about cities like Chicago. You accidentally walk across city limits all the time without even realizing it. California does have fairly strict gun control, but some people want to see it expanded nationally, or perhaps look something more like what Australia has. So let's clear up what Australia actually has. After the 1996 Port Arthur massacre, they enacted sweeping gun control that essentially eliminated mass shootings. But it didn't eliminate all gun violence. Because there are still guns in Australia, they didn't completely ban them. Here's what they actually did. Completely ban all automatic and military style weapons. Just like we did for machine guns and temporarily for assault weapons. With the addition of having to sell back any currently owned ones. Set up a national registry for all firearms. Restrict interstate purchase and transfer to licensed dealers, just like we do. Require secure storage of all firearms. And require anyone seeking to own a firearm to obtain a license. Who can get a license? They basically have the same restrictions that we do under the Brady Bill, with the additional requirement of being mentally sound. You also have to have a genuine reason for wanting to possess a firearm. Hunting and even target shooting at a gun club count. You just can't have one to hang on your wall, I guess. You also have to demonstrate appropriate training in the safe use of firearms. Kinda like what we do with driver's licenses. That's it, it wasn't a complete ban. Plenty of people still own rifles, pistols, and shotguns. Nobody in the United States is talking about a complete ban. Oh, okay, very few people are actually talking about that. By the way, repealing the Second Amendment is not unconstitutional. You would have to pass an amendment to repeal that amendment, which is something we've totally done before.
Please drink responsibly.
It's a long, complicated process outlined in the Constitution. It's just about the most constitutional thing you can do. It's not impossible, but it's incredibly unlikely. So let's talk about some of the reforms people are seriously suggesting. Again, I am not pushing for any of these ideas, but I am going to talk about them. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. Australian-style gun control is probably the most extreme. It would expand on laws we already have, reinstate the assault weapons ban, and ban semi-automatic rifles for many people. The Supreme Court has already decided that machine guns and sawed-off shotguns are not civilian weapons, so some people would like to see the AR-15 and other semi-automatic rifles treated the same way. But the biggest change would be making guns look more like cars. You have to have a license to drive a car, and in the process of getting a license, license, you had to demonstrate the ability to drive and have basic knowledge of traffic laws. Having a gun license could also take the place of needing a background check every time you buy a gun. Some people suggest having a title attached to every firearm, much like there is with your car. This could also create a national firearms registry, much like in Australia. But more importantly, this is the only way to close the gun show loophole while still allowing private sales. Any other method would just be nibbling around the edges and you'd be playing whack-a-mole with loopholes for the next decade. As it is right now, you only need a background check if you buy from a store with a federal firearms license. Buying from a person at a gun show or anywhere else doesn't require anything. So a title transfer where you have to go to the courthouse just like you do for your car would serve the purpose of making sure you have a license and a background check, and could serve the additional purpose of acting as a waiting period. Some states have mandatory waiting periods, but not all of them, and even if they do, it's only when purchasing from a dealer with an FFL, not private sales. Mandatory waiting periods mostly serve the purpose of stopping you from making an impulsive, rash decision. Many of the recent high-profile mass shootings were perpetrated by someone who bought the weapon only a few days earlier specifically for that purpose. But mostly it would stop suicide, and yes, states with mandatory waiting periods have lower rates of suicide. Mandatory waiting periods won't stop all mass shootings, or even gun violence as a whole. In fact, no single solution will stop all gun violence. Even during the federal assault weapons ban, while there was a reduction in mass shootings, there were still mass shootings. Because of recent events, people have become very serious about having a conversation about gun control, and gun owners are gonna have to be part of that conversation. Simply shutting it down by saying that it's a God-given right or that any gun control leads to tyranny isn't gonna cut it anymore. As I've shown you, we already have quite a bit of gun control. Australia has just a little bit more, and they're not living under a tyrannical government. Likewise, the common talking point that gun control led to the Holocaust is just as ridiculous.
So, but just clarify, if there had been no gun control laws in Europe at that time, would 6 million Jews have been slaughtered?
I think the likelihood of Hitler being able to accomplish his goals would have been greatly diminished if the people had been armed.
I'm not even going to address this because 3 Arrows, an actual German person talking about actual Nazi gun control, already did. Go check that out if you have the time. There are other talking points and common sayings that gun owners use to stop the conversation though, like,
guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Which, yeah, but guns are specifically designed for killing, whether you're talking about animals or people. Knives and cars have other primary purposes. It's the gun that makes it so easy.
An armed society is a polite society.
I don't really want to live in a society where people are nice to each other only because they're afraid of getting shot.
It's not a gun problem, it's a mental health problem.
As if the United States is the only country in the world with mental health issues. We are the only country in the world with more guns than actual people though, so maybe... It doesn't matter, all of these are just ways to stop the conversation about gun control by shifting it to something else. You're gonna have to participate in the conversation eventually. When one kid eats a Tide Pod, we lock up all the Tide Pods. When one person tries to sneak a bomb onto a plane in their shoe, we all have to take off our shoes. Forever. So when thousands of people are being killed by the same product every year, it's not hard to understand why some people think it's time we do something about it. Simply dismissing the conversation or ignoring someone because they use the wrong terminology will either result in extreme legislation or just more of the same, neither of which will be helpful to anyone. At least now you'll be able to approach the conversation with a greater depth of knowledge, and the next time someone says, "We need to ban all assault rifles," or "You might as well just burn the Constitution," hopefully now you'll know better. So what do you think about this issue? As if you weren't already going to tell me. What topic should I moderately explain next? Let me know down below and don't forget to trigger that subscribe button. Sorry for taking so long to get this video out. If you've been following me on Twitter, you know why. And why Wheatley isn't in this outro card. Also make sure to follow me on Facebook and join us on the subreddit.